Chapter 24. Countdown. About an hour short of midnight that same night, the weather took a definite turn for the worse. A blizzard began to cover the ground with yet another fresh layer of snow, and by 1 o'clock in the morning virtually everyone in the encampment was taking shelter in their homes, waiting for it to pass. Reyes and Gagara were no exception. They took shelter in their rooms at the castle ruins. The very air felt so cold that just keeping out of the wind wasn't enough, and they had to huddle together under their blankets to keep warm. "Spending an entire day in the arms of my beloved," Handsome, Gagara joked. "I can think of nothing I'd rather do." This wasn't the first time they'd huddled together like this. It had become a habit. These heavy blizzards were becoming a regular thing. Reyes and Gagara shared their body heat with each other and with baby Mangloss, who was snuggled in under the blankets. They only left the warmth and security of their bed to answer calls of nature, or to fetch them both something to eat. Although Reyes and Gagara could afford to take shelter from the storm, there were some people who were still quite active around the encampment. Reyes worried most about his two bodyguards. They were stuck outside in the courtyard, and they stayed there regardless of how bad the weather got. He had told them more than once that he was safe inside the encampment, and it wouldn't bother him if they retreated to find better shelter. But they refused to budge. At least they had that large bonfire to keep them warm. "Forgive me, my chief," Reyes remembered Quinnigoff had commented the last time he had brought the subject up. "We cannot afford to let our guard down. Shortly after our leader dismissed her own bodyguards, someone tried to poison her." "No one is going to try and poison me," Reyes had insisted. "You can't be sure of that, my chief," Quinnigoff had told him. "There are something like 100,000 humans in this encampment. Many of them are likely to have some kind of grudge against our people for past indiscretions. I cannot allow the possibility that someone might seek to do you harm." And so the bodyguards stayed on duty all hours of the day and night through fair weather and foul. Reyes had found out a few small details about his bodyguards in the last few months. Jenni and Reyes were closely related. They were full-blooded sisters, hence the similarity in their names. Quinnigoff and Heshkoff, on the other hand, although also having similarities in their names, were only half-sisters. In Harpy society, that meant that they shared the same father, along with almost everyone else in the village. There was one good thing about the heavy blizzard. The sky wasn't purple anymore. The elves were busy sheltering as well. When dawn broke on the second day after the war council, it was still snowing outside, but the snow was easing up, and judging by his own calculations, Reyes reckoned that somewhere between 10 and 11 that morning the snow would stop falling completely, allowing the sun to get through for a fair number of hours. Reyes left the bed a little reluctantly that morning. It was cold in the room, and the presence of Gagara under the blankets made him long to stay with her. He would love to spend a whole day in the company of his beloved, but he needed to get up. There were things he needed to do before the spell was cast. For one thing, he needed to get out of this room. The moment the spell was cast, the floor, mattress, blankets, and even the table along with the rest of the keep would vanish, and it would be quite a long drop from here to the ground if he weren't flying. Once he had gotten up, Reyes stepped out onto the balcony, feeling the weak supports groan a little under his extra weight. In the courtyard below, Quinnigoff and Jenni had just landed by the huge bonfire and were in the middle of taking over the duty of protecting their mail from Heshkoff and Reyes. It was good to watch. There was a brief greeting between the two sets of bodyguards, and then Heshkoff and Reyes took wing, flying back to their homes to shelter from the cold. Gagara didn't stay in the bed long after Reyes left it. She came out to join him on the balcony, little Mangloss held tightly in her arms. The balcony groaned again under even more weight. As per usual at this time of day, the peasants had formed a queue in the courtyard for the well. There was so little time left before the spell was due to be cast, and everyone was getting on with the business as if nothing special was happening today. Maybe there were one or two small differences. The people seemed to be being a little bit more polite with each other this morning. There also seemed to be quite an expectant vibe in the air. Down in the courtyard, one young girl broke free of her queue and began to chase after a small cat. "Look," Reyes said, pointing at the scene while looking towards his young baby. "A kitty." Gagara watched the scene slightly bemused. "I doubt there's enough meat on that to make much of a meal, but if you fancy it as a snack, I can fetch it for you." Reyes commented, a little confused that Gagara seemed to have misunderstood. "Would you hold Mangloss for me?" Gagara offered the baby to Reyes. "This won't take a minute." "No," Reyes replied. "Leave it. I'm not that hungry." The young girl grabbed the cat and walked back to her place in the queue with it, where her mother was stood waiting. Gagara grinned. "You were teasing me," Reyes accused. Gagara glanced at him for a moment, and then she looked away, her head pointed slightly skyward in a mock pose of innocence. 1 hour, people, a voice suddenly announced. It sounded very like the voice of the king, but clearly had magic behind it, amplifying it so that everyone in the encampment could hear. Start making your preparations. 1 hour left, and all that would remain of the encampment would be a lot of muddy fields filled with people awaiting their turn to be taken into the painting. A sudden thought occurred to Reyes, and he launched himself into the air. The balcony made a strange creaking noise as it was relieved of his weight. One of the advantages of putting this old castle into the painting occurred to Reyes. No matter how dangerous the ruins might seem to be at the moment, they would never collapse. It wouldn't be possible to repair them either, but somehow Reyes doubted that was ever going to happen anyway. Where are we going, handsome? Gagara had taken to the air with him and was flying right behind him as she spoke. She still held baby Mangloss tightly in both her arms. To our village, Reyes called over his shoulder to her. The king has just announced that we have 1 hour left. I heard, Gagara commented. You and I understood it, Reyes explained, but no other members of our race would. I need to ensure that everyone is ready when the time comes. The Harpy village was located about as far away from the ruins of the castle as it was possible to get. They were located right at the very edge of the encampment, about equidistant between the western and eastern gates. They had built their village snugly between the peasants who had once populated the village of Eastway and those who had once lived in the village of Echo's Land. At first, the appearance of the Harpy village between these two groups of humans hadn't been all that welcome, but after 4 months they'd gotten used to the presence of each other, and it wasn't unknown for humans to venture into the Harpy village, often with a mind for trade. Authentic Harpy leather skirts were in high demand, and some of the young girls in both the neighbouring villages, as well as a few further afield, had taken to wearing such garments. Reyes reached the village and landed by the huge bonfire that dominated the very centre of the settlement. The main bonfire of the village was close to where the Harpies had set up the fire pits, so there was already a lot of activity nearby. Gagara landed on Reyes' left side. Mangloss, in her arms, made a few gurgling noises, but otherwise didn't seem even slightly distressed at having been transported in this way. Reyes hadn't even realised that Quinnigoff and Tanegi had followed, although he should have expected they would. The two bodyguards came to ground just behind where Reyes and Gagara had landed. "Chief," one of the Harpies commented by way of greeting, "we don't see you around here often." There were several murmured comments of approval from some of the Harpies. Reyes waved at the speaker. He then extended the wave to take in the rest of those gathered nearby. "The spell is going to be 50 minutes, the voice called out. "Make sure you're ready. Cast soon. I'd prefer it if everyone could gather close to the fire, so I can keep you all abreast of what's happening. At the moment, we still have close to 50 minutes. So, Gagara suggested, not really looking at who she was addressing, concentrating instead on her child in her arms, if some of you could go and fetch the others, and bring everything with you that you don't want to get stuck in the painting. Every huntress should go and fetch her weapons before we continue, at the very least," Reyes instructed. "Well, go," Gagara insisted, before anyone had a chance to move, "and please hurry." Some of the Harpies present already had their weapons with them and stayed where they were. The others scattered, heading back to their specific huts to find their stuff and to warn the rest of the village of what was expected of them. One of the Harpies who had remained began to approach Reyes. She did so slowly and respectfully, a child carried in her own arms. But Quinnigoff and Tanegi still acted as if she was a potential threat. They stepped forward and blocked the mother from getting too close. Reyes put his arms out and nudged his two bodyguards apart so he could address the Harpy before him. "Can I help you?" The Harpy held her child before her at arm's length. Fairly clearly her child was male. My name is Kiskra. I just wanted to thank you for letting my baby live." "This is your heir," Gagara explained, in case he was uncertain who the child was. Reyes nodded. "What's her name?" "I thought I'd name her after you," Kishka replied. "After you both. Sir Reyes and Gagara Damoff." "Damoff," Reyes corrected. "Damoff?" Kishka tilted her head slightly to the side. It sounded almost as if she was terrified of having made such a terrible mistake as she apologised. I'm sorry, I'll change her name at once." "It's okay," Reyes assured her. He rested a hand gently on one of her shoulders. "It's not important. She is your child. Whatever you name her is your decision." Kishka smiled. She held her baby close to her and said, "I'll bring her up properly. I'll make you proud of her. Your village will be left in good hands when the time comes." "Good," Reyes acknowledged. When he looked at Gagara and asked, "Did any other male children get born since this one?" Gagara seemed a little hesitant to answer. "Well, there was just one." "Really?" Reyes said. "So I have two heirs. That should ensure the future of our village." "No, not really." Gagara was being a little bit cagey. "Not really," Reyes pressed. "What happened?" A male should never allow the existence of two heirs, Gagara told him, sounding very defensive. It makes the male seem weak. The second child was executed shortly after she was born. It had to be done. What? Reyes felt horrified at the revelation. I thought it made it clear that only I am allowed to make such judgments. If someone is to die, then it should be by my command. You are the chief, Gagara said sharply. The running of the village is not in your purview. Besides, sometimes you're too weak to make these necessary decisions. You, Reyes looked to Gagara fuming. You gave the order? For the good of the village, Gagara explained. But Reyes was almost speechless. We are harpies. Two males would not get on together. It could even have caused a civil war. Gagara defended her position by yelling at him. I don't know about you, but I take my task of village leader rather seriously. Reyes didn't know what to say. Gagara was right. At least, from her point of view, she was right. Reyes would have solved it by declaring to Reyes and Gagara them off as the next chief, and that would have been that. Generally, though, harpies didn't think that way. Another living male would always have been a potential rival, both to the chief and to the heir. Had the second male been allowed to live, then there was a good chance that the heir would have been found dead one morning, murdered by the mother of the second male, with the intent of elevating her son to the position of heir. Had both children survived to reach 8 years old, they might have torn the village apart as they gathered support for their claim to the chieftain, regardless of what Reyes might have ordered. Civil war was unlikely, but it was possible, unless the threat of conflict was removed, as Gagara had done. Reyes felt angry with Gagara for killing the child, and yet he could still see the wisdom of her action. He didn't like it, but neither could he bring himself to condemn her for doing what she thought was right. Reyes turned his back on Gagara for a moment. He couldn't bring himself to look at her. He breathed in deeply a few times, doing his best to calm himself down. Kishkra, evidently sensing the tension, retired to a respectful distance with her child. Silence reigned until the next announcement. 40 minutes, the voice called out. It had been 10 minutes since the last announcement, and most of the village had returned to the fire with their weapons. Handsome, Gagara pleaded. Reyes nodded, turning back to face the gathered harpies. Whatever Gagara had done, he still had responsibility to his village. 40 minutes, he translated. Forgive me, Gagara urged. I know I went against your word, but I did it for the good of the village. Reyes couldn't help himself. He glanced briefly towards Gagara, anger for her actions still in his heart, irrespective of her reasons for killing the child. Then he saw his own child, Lagloth, being lovingly nurtured, and his heart melted. He loved Gagara, he couldn't help it, it was beyond his control. She was a harpy, she'd been brought up like a harpy, and occasionally she acted like a harpy. Could he really punish her for being the creature he had fallen in love with? Reyes decided he should address the village. It was better than dwelling on things he couldn't control. When the time comes, I think it would be best if most of you, not just the young and the old, but virtually everyone, travel inside the painting. An entire village flying through the sky is far more likely to attract unwanted attention than just a small group of huntresses. If there are no more than 4 or 5 of us, we will likely be dismissed as a simple hunting party, and will more than likely be ignored. And just who will this hunting party consist of? Someone shouted. I have to be one of them. I'll be the one carrying the painting, Reyes explained. Quinnagoth and Tanegi take the task of being my bodyguards very seriously. I don't think they'd take it lightly if I ordered them to stay in the painting. I will be the 4th, Gagara commented. She looked at Reyes with her best doe-like expression. Just a couple of minutes ago, Reyes had felt nothing but anger towards his wife. Now he was puttying her claws once again. Gagara will be the 4th. Why you? Someone asked. You should stay in the painting with us, where it's safe. I must agree, Quinnagoth offered. The male shouldn't be put at risk. I am the one who has the means to carry the painting, Reyes explained simply. I wear this ring. You could give the ring to another harpy suggested. I could, Reyes agreed, looking at the harpy who had just spoken. She was wearing a string of pretty stones about her neck. This wasn't unusual. Most of the harpies in the village were wearing some form of jewellery, and Gagara had been very free of her gifts of polished stones now that she had 4 months to play with a magical tumbler. Such gifts helped to keep the villagers loyal. Would you trust your lovely necklace to one of your neighbours for a couple of days? No, the harpy replied sharply. Reyes resisted the urge to smile. Sometimes Reyes had trouble understanding others of his own species. Sometimes their motivations were quite transparent. Then why do you think I'd be willing to hand over my ring to another? Not even me, handsome, Gagara teased. Well, perhaps you, Reyes agreed, accepting her. But then you'd be one of those flying there, and I'd want to be by your side. so we would gain nothing. 30 minutes, came the call. Time was getting short. It didn't seem as if it had been a full 10 minutes since the last announcement. Race wondered if they had sped the count a little. Since there were no clocks in the encampment, no one could be certain if it truly had been 10 minutes or not since the last announcement. 30 minutes, Race translated. Is it true? Someone asked. I heard that we were being taken to fight in a battle, and that we'd be up against 200 villages. It's not true, Gagara commented. It's a lot less than that. 70 villages, Race clarified. That's plenty enough. They'll still cut us to pieces, the harpy commented. Harpies were a proud race. They were often very sure of themselves in battle. But even the most valiant of harpies would think twice about her village being capable of handling the population of 70. We won't be facing them alone, Race announced. We will just be one small part of an army. I will keep my promise to you that our lives are not going to be thrown away, regardless of what orders the human king gives me. I won't be putting you in the front line to take the brunt of the enemy's assault. If the worst comes to the worst, Gagara said, appealing to their baser nature, we will be able to fly away to safety, while our human allies will have to stay and fight to the end. Race looked sharply at Gagara. He had no intention of running from the battle, but then he realised what Gagara was doing. She was giving his village an escape route, a place they could go if things went bad, an assurance that they, at least, wouldn't have to fight to the last. 20 minutes, everyone, the voice yelled. Make ready. Everyone should start moving towards the central ruins. Please be careful of falling masonry, and remember to bring your animals with you. You should stay close to your village elder. Do not get separated, and do not leave anyone behind. Race translated the message to his village. That was never 10 minutes, someone commented. I doubt it was even 5. Race shrugged his shoulders. I'm just relaying the message. Maybe their timing is a little off. We should get moving. Why? Someone asked. Why move? I don't know, Race admitted. I suppose it would make it easier for them to put everyone into the painting if they don't have to hurry around the encampment. But other than that, I'm not sure. I guess we'll find out. Race had often thought that there was no more beautiful sight than that of a harpy in flight, especially when the harpy in question was his wife. Now the entire village took to the air, following their chief across the sky to the old ruined castle. There was something that felt so right about being part of a flock, and not just part of it. Race was leading it. What about clothing? Gagara voiced as they flew. There was almost a laugh in her voice as she spoke. Race replied, uncertain as to what she meant. When the painting is activated, the people and animals will stay behind. But what about the clothing they're wearing? Will the fields below suddenly be filled with thousands of naked humans? Race did laugh. No, Gagara, I thought I told you. Everything you're carrying will stay with you, including clothing. That's a relief, Gagara confided. That wasn't a sight I was looking forward to. Humans are so ugly when they're naked. Once Race reached the castle ruins, he landed for a moment on one of the higher points of the wall that surrounded the courtyard. He didn't stay there long. It suddenly occurred to him that when the spell was cast, this wall would vanish and anyone on top of it would be cast to the ground. Instead, he searched the courtyard for the ideal place to land, and having spotted it, led those of his village to it. Race landed close to the still burning fire that had kept his bodyguards warm on these cold winter's days. The rest of his village landed as close to the fire as they dared, forming a loop around the fire to make the most of the heat being supplied. Gagara took her rightful place by Race's side. If the spell is cast and my tumbler is left in our room, will I still be able to use it? Gagara sounded a little worried. You will, my love, Race assured her. You just won't be able to take it out of the painting. Gagara didn't seem all that happy. I'll be back in a moment. I think I'd better fetch it. She handed the baby to Race. Hold Lagnoff for me, would you? Race took the child and held her tight, and then Gagara flew up to the room they had been sharing and disappeared from sight. Race watched her worriedly. It wouldn't be long before the castle was put in the painting. While she had plenty of time, he still worried that she might be in the castle and find herself treading empty air as the spell was cast. The king and queen were also in the courtyard, standing together in front of the old keep, with Greyforth and his family, Manaport for his wife and children, and Princess Alice keeping them company. Mangloss was also there in the courtyard, but he wasn't keeping still. He seemed to be pacing, if that was the right word. He walked slowly from his small room to the great hall, using his mage's staff as if it was a walking stick. It took him a good 2 minutes each time just to make the trip one way. Then, after a short visit, he would return the way he had come. 10 minutes, the king suddenly called, his voice amplified for all to hear. Mangloss re-emerged from his small room and once again began to head back towards the entrance of the keep. As he walked, he could hardly miss the harpies that were gathered over by the fire. He saw Reyes and struggled over to talk. "This is the awkward bit," Mangloss confided. "What is?" Reyes asked. "I haven't told anyone else. Well, the king and queen know, but no one else. The thing is, when I cast the final spell, the totems that are protecting the village, the ones that are creating the barrier that keeps the elves outside, will also be taken into the painting, along with everything else." Gagara returned. She landed beside Reyes, the magic tumbler held triumphantly in her hand. "You mean the barrier is going to come down?" Reyes commented, turning his head to greet Gagara. "Not immediately," Mangloss said. "There will be a little bit of residual magic that will keep the barrier up for a short while at least." Gagara reached out to take baby Lagnoth back from him and handed him the tumbler. "How long?" Reyes asked. He looked at the tumbler uncertainly, and then, realising what Gagara intended, he tucked it away in one of the pockets of his ring. "I'm hoping it might be as long as 10 minutes, Mangloss confided. "There are no guarantees, though." "That won't be enough time to get everyone into the painting," Gagara commented, joining the conversation. "It won't be, dear, no," Mangloss agreed. "This is why you want everyone close to the ruins." "You'll buy a little bit of time," Reyes suggested. "We will have to move quickly once the spell is cast." "I almost wish we'd spent some time rehearsing this," Mangloss confided. "All we can do is hope that the elves are confused when the barrier goes down, and instead of charging straight in to slaughter us, they'll think they have time to prepare their forces properly. I'm hoping they'll assume that one of their mages has brought the barrier down, and that it was none of our doing." "Well, it's been 4 months, Reyes pointed out. "I'm sure discipline has grown quite lax." "Let's hope it's enough," Mangloss voiced. "Anyway, once the barrier's gone down and everyone is in the painting, I'd suggest that you and your harpies fly as high as you can before you begin to head south. Fly up out of arrow range. I've had a close look at the enemy surrounding the barrier, and it's made up completely of elves. They have no harpies to give you aerial pursuit. You should have no trouble getting away." "That's good to know," Reyes replied. Mangloss rested a hand gently on Reyes' shoulder and then turned away and headed back towards the main doors of the keep. "I'd better get ready. See you in Arlis." "See you in Arlis," Reyes replied. He watched the elderly mage walk slowly back to the keep. Reyes doubted he had time to check on the painting and still returned to his room before the spell was due to be cast. 5 minutes, the king announced. 5 minutes, Gagara translated for the harpies. The king also followed Mangloss's progress through the courtyard. He turned his head and seemed to be waiting until the venerable mage had reached the keep before he announced, 3 minutes. Everyone make ready. Those of you who can should place one hand on an animal and the other on one of your neighbours. We shall move you into the painting one village at a time, if that is possible. Your elders have been taught a short incantation to get you all into the painting. Once in the painting, you should find everything as you left it. Those who enter the painting first might be tempted to take advantage of the situation and claim homes that are not really yours by right. Be aware that I will come down hard on anyone who tries this. We are not beyond finding out the truth. Anyone doing such a thing will be charged with theft and treated accordingly. I hope this is clear. Now, please be ready. There are only 2 minutes to go." 2 minutes, Reyes translated for the harpies. He breathed deeply. He looked at Gagara. He looked at Tanegi and then at Quinagoth. And then he looked up at the purple sky and wondered how long they would really have before the barrier gave way. 1 minute, the king called. 1 minute, Reyes conveyed. "Get ready."